Morning, everyone. So, yes, the budget has finally been announced. You can see, as I said, why it took so long because there was a lot in it, more than usual for the first budget of a new government. Um, and it has shut a lot of people. There's a lot of people going on about, it's on the front page of every newspaper. But what is on the front page of every newspaper? It's just, oh, loads of taxes. Yeah, we knew that. And in fact, that's what people want. What people were saying during the election, what polling kept saying, and all the way leading up to it. When we said this is where Rishi Sunak was going wrong, he kept going, "Oh, tax cuts, tax cuts," and then he had he had the tax cut, the national insurance in January. It didn't do anything. So, oh, we need more tax cuts, and we kept trying to point out that the polling was saying that people were saying, no, we don't want tax cuts. We want public spending. In fact, tax us more for more public spending. Well, what have we got? We've got a budget that's got more public spending. And in fact, I'll show you. Okay, so the resolution will be awkward for this. But let me just go over. The other thing to point out, I had a weird comment on my channel yesterday from people. It was from someone who'd obviously been reading some right-wing crap, and they were going, "Oh, this is a thing," and the taxes, the 40 billion pounds of taxes, 41 billion if it won't split hairs, 40 billion pounds of taxes, and then in a few years they'll need it. The OBR said they'll need even more, so they'll have to put taxes up even more. At which point, they haven't actually read anything that the OBR have said, because I'm thinking to myself, they're thinking that this 40 billion pounds of extra taxes is per year, don't they? It's not, it's across the 5 years. So the actual breakdown of figures, which I'm afraid you won't be able to see apparently, but I'll read it out to you. So you've got 3 lines here. The total policy decisions is effectively the difference between tax and spend. So it's what we'll have to borrow. So over the 5 year, in fact, that's quite interesting because Rachel Reeves changed the definition of debt so that because otherwise she'd have only had about £9.5 billion to borrow extra, which isn't very much. So she changed the definition of debt so that she'd be able to borrow more. And it's not a fiddle. It's what a lot of other countries do. We were a bit of an outlier there. And the belief was she can't borrow. It would have potentially given her about 50 to 60 billion pounds in theory. But the markets would have gone mental if she'd have done that. We're into Liz Truss territory, so she couldn't do that. And I was reading lots of economic reports, like in the Financial Times, The Economist, places like that, by actual economists. And they were saying, she can probably get away with about 20 billion pounds. Well, it's about 33 billion pounds. And although there was a bit of a reaction in the markets, everyone's going, oh, it's all gone back again today. So the markets are absolutely fine with it. And we've got that. And what it has meant was this is an extra additional 74 billion pounds worth of spending. Now, so that is a mixture of day-to-day spending and investment. But the OBR have also said that in real terms, there's an increase in day-to-day spending as well. So basically, anyone who was beforehand saying this is going to be an austerity budget was completely wrong. And I said before, there was zero evidence it ever would be. But if anyone tries telling you this is an austerity budget, they are lying, because the OBR report makes it really clear that spending, and in real terms, as a proportion of GDP, day-to-day spending increases with this budget. So it's the opposite of austerity. The actual amount of spending has gone up. And it's doing exactly what people would want. It's raised a lot of taxes, more than was being reported, but it also protected more people than was being reported. So I'll get rid of that. A few things that completely derailed the Tory media, or in fact the media in general, because all of the media were trying to push certain things. So first of all, they were going, yeah, but if fuel duty goes up, that is going to hit working people, which is what I said. It's like, yeah, that's going to be a dodgy one. Nope, that's not gone up. There was talk about, she's going to keep the freeze on income tax bands in place. It's like, no, as soon as the scheduled ones are finished, she's going to return them to going back up with inflation. So any fiscal drag the Tories want to moan about, that's on them. So the only fiscal drag now is what was in their budget. And what was the other one? Small business. So we knew that they were going to be increasing the national insurance contributions for employers, and people go, oh, well, that's small businesses. Well, they've actually protected small business, and more than that, there are now actually some small businesses who are going to be paying less national insurance as a result of it, because she boosted the amount before an employer would have to pay it. In fact, I'm going to read out a little comment that I came across, if I can find it. So a Labour MP was sent this message, and it says, as a small business owner with 12 staff, I saw the headlines over the last few days and concerned I was expecting a 2% increase. However, as the small business allowance has increased to £10,000, we're actually going to be better off. So, there are going to be some small business owners who are actually better off with this budget. So it's again hitting mostly the larger businesses. And it is raising a lot of money. This national insurance thing is raising a lot of money. You say, check your mic. Nothing wrong with my mic. Sorry. I don't know what's causing that issue then, but my mic is fine. And my sound thing on here is all normal. What was I going to say? Yeah. And in terms of where the taxes are going as well, so we also have this. Again, I don't know. Let me try and make it a little bit bigger, because apparently it will be quite low res. I'll just cover myself up. You don't need to see me. This is showing, like, the red bars, the ones that are underneath, are the extra taxes. So this is showing where, and what you've got here is each bar from the left-hand side is the poorest 10%, or the ones on the lowest incomes. And it goes on. The very end bar is the averages, so ignore that. So that big old bar second from the right is the top 10% of earners. And that's where the taxes have been loaded onto. So again, the taxes are hitting the people with the most money. So, if you think about what sort of people have said that they'd want from a budget, it does it. You can still quibble about individual aspects of it. I would still quibble with individual aspects of it, No one's going to agree with all of it. But at the end of the day, it raises a lot of taxes. It doesn't mess about. It raises a lot of taxes, and those taxes are loaded up onto people who are wealthier. It protects people on the lowest incomes. It boosts the income of the people on the lowest incomes, because because the Daily Telegraph a couple of days ago were talking about how this minimum wage is going to be, like, I think they were talking about £12.10 or something, and it's going to be £12.20. So it's gone above even where the Telegraph were moaning about it. There's an increase in public day-to-day spending, so it's the opposite of austerity. There's going to be an increase in investment, a massive increase in investment. It's like, so you look at the front page of the headlines today. All it is about, Labour's £40 billion budget grab. Then it says things can only debt better. And it's like, but when you raise taxes, you don't have to borrow as much. So it's not as much debt. But all of them are just talking about this £40 billion tax thing. That's it. That's all it's about. And you just think, that's what people asked for. That's what the public asked for. That's what many people on the left asked for. That's what they wanted. We want more. They didn't specifically want higher taxes, but they want more public spending, more investment, and pay for it via loading up more taxes on the rich. Just what they've got. Anyway, catch up with some comments. Can I comment on the IFS analysis of the employer national insurance contribution on employers' wage growth on consumer price on job investment? No, because I'll tell you why. Because what I've been doing yesterday, so I've got them up here. So I've been reading through the budget. The budget is 168 pages. Then I was reading the OBR assessment. That's 205 pages. There's a few pages that are blank, but it's mostly that. Then I was reading the OBR's report into Jeremy Hunt's naughtiness. That is 22 pages. So basically 400 pages of stuff, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've read it all in detail and taken it all in. So the idea that I have not at all been able to read anything else. So anything less relevant, no, I haven't got around to yet. Ivan Ambrose, £20 super chat, thank you very much, says, Sunak's response was appalling. He had the audacity to talk about responsibility, doesn't even know the meaning of the word. All he has is contempt for the British people. How dare he lecture about the broken promises? Well, it doesn't matter now, he's gone. as of next week, he'll be a backbencher. I strongly suspect he's not going to immediately jet off to California, but he may well be bound there at some point. And which Rachel Reeves, I mean, I'll tell you what was bizarre about the actual statement, the budget statement from Rachel Reeves. It was the biggest laugh she got, obviously, was picking on Rishi Sunak over the air duty. So there's going to be an increase in air duty, which for most of us, well, I say most of us, I don't travel, but if you do travel, you travel by plane, it'll cost you an extra couple of quid. But if you travel by private plane, it's that the air duty is going up by 50%. And the thing is as well, and it just shows you, they won't even notice it. Like, if you can afford to go by private plane, apparently this works out at something like about an extra 450 quid. Like, no one who travels by private plane is going to go, hang on a minute, this looks like it's about 450 quid more expensive than usual. So, you know, it's what it is. But the biggest cheer, people, I mean, some of you will have watched it. I can't believe that the biggest cheer she got was a small cut to draft beer duty. I just thought to myself, are MPs are they that brazenly drunk all the time that the biggest cheer comes from a cut on beer? But then I was just thinking a bit more charitably and thinking, well, maybe they just think it's really good news for their voters. Because I couldn't tell where the cheers were coming from. I was going to guess the Labour benchers. So I was thinking, yeah, maybe they're just thinking to themselves, this is a really good thing to sell to my constituents. A penny off a pint of beer. But anyway. Right, anyway, let's have a look. Sorry. There's a comment up there. Sorry, there's some running commentary. I can't really say anything. Phil's suffering from information overload. Well, I am. I mean, there's a lot to go through. There is a lot to go through. MPs don't pay beer duty in the House of Commons bar. No, I think it'll be more. Well, I mean, they don't just do their drinking in the House of Commons bar. Is the beer cut immediately? No. I mean, when a budget's announced, it comes into force unless they say so earlier the following April. So there's actually like half a year before any of this actually happens. So, because the thing is as well, I mean, what Rachel Reeves has done is she's set out the tax and spending plans, but we don't know exactly where all the money's going. That comes as a result of the spending review. So that comes next spring. So, you know, it's like we've got the general picture. We know that they're raising X amount of taxes. We know that they're increasing spending by a certain amount. We know we're going to have about £32 billion worth of borrowing, extra borrowing over the next 5 years, which, you know, borrowing costs are at the moment quite high. So that's a little bit of a worry there. Can I link the OBR report? Yes, I have done so. In the description below, I've already put it in there. You've got 3 links. You've got the budget, you've got the OBR analysis, and you've got the OBR report into Jeremy Hunt's naughtiness. Now, I will just précis that. I will just sort of say, look, so what the report says, it doesn't say it's £22 billion, by the way. That's a political argument whether it's actually £22 billion. But what it does say is that the Conservative government, like Jeremy Hunt basically, did conceal financial information from the OBR ahead of their March budget analysis. And they further said that if they'd have known the full picture, their analysis would have been different. In other words, Jeremy Hunt cut national insurance in his March budget based on lies. So if Jeremy Hunt had not concealed things from the OBR, he would not have been able to cut the national insurance that second time, like he did, because the OBR analysis would have absolutely trashed it and it would have been political suicide. So he wouldn't have been able to do it, which of course means then Labour wouldn't have had to put up the employer's national insurance by as much. Because remember, the employer's national insurance is effectively a counter to the employees' national insurance cuts that came earlier this year. So if the Tories, and they did that deliberately, they did it to try and trip Labour up. They knew Labour were going to win. and they only cut national insurance. I mean, yes, to try and get a few extra votes so they could win a few extra seats, sure. But they mostly did it to blow a hole in Labour's spending plans to make it much tougher for them, because they thought to themselves, oh, they'll be forced to adopt more austerity measures and then they'll get crucified in the next election. They obviously didn't realise that Rachel Reeves was prepared to go, no, we ain't actually having austerity. So, yes. Hunt sitting there yesterday denying everything. Yeah, even as the report was. I mean, although at the time Jeremy Hunt was denying it in Parliament yesterday, the report hadn't been put. I couldn't see the report, but it had already been shown to MPs and journalists had seen it. So people had seen it and were reporting on it. Rachel Reeves stood up in the House explaining the key point, which is that the OBR, they didn't say, yes, it's £22 billion. I mean, that is, there's potentially political shenanigans there in terms of how much it is. But they did say that information was concealed, and if it had not been concealed from them, their analysis of the budget would have been materially different. So Reeves was able to say that in the House. She obviously wasn't going to say that if the report didn't back it up, because she'd be lying to Parliament. And indeed, the report is now out. I've read it. It is what it says. £2 per 100 cigs increase for smokers. So I didn't look at that particularly, but that's part of the course, isn't it? You will never not get an increase, I suppose, on duties on tobacco. Look at the horrible two wanting to become Tory leader, talk about rotten. Well, yeah. I mean, ironically, at the moment, I still find it amazing that in this leadership contest, Kemi Badenoch is considered the sane one. She is actually the relatively sane one, because she is saying some things that are correct. Say the UK has relatively low employers' national insurance contributions compared to other European countries. Yes, but I mean, again, it's like when you look at European countries, so we are now raising our tax burden, but we're still not going to be getting the investment of European countries in general. You can't change that overnight. Again, you cannot compensate for 14 years of a complete lack of investment in public services. So it is going to take time. In fact, it's quite remarkable that Labour keep talking about getting the NHS back on its feet in 5 years. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I mean, there's still going to be a long way to go even in 5 years. We saw last time, when Labour took over in 1997 with a much healthier economy. I mean, they didn't inherit a crap economy. Yes, they boosted it still further, but it was still a perfectly good, there was perfectly good economic growth going on. In fact, the Tories were still considered at that time to be the party best able to manage the economy. They just still lost regardless. But Labour was still improving the NHS even at the end of that 13 years. Investment was still going up, and rating lists were still coming down. And then you think now, so I mean, the NHS is in a worse state than it was in 1997. Much worse state. Ivan Ambrose again, £5, thank you. It says the Tories continue not to apologise, not having humility and contrition, not sitting well with the British people. No, it won't. There are certain things they are going to have to apologise for. Now that this report is out and it says the Tories lied about the state of their finances, that is something I think they are going to, they're not going to do it immediately. I think they are going to have to decide that they're going to have to own up to that, because Labour are going to beat them over the head with this. The Tories' only choice is to blame it on individuals, like Partygate. Although the Conservative Party suffered a little bit from Partygate, that was mostly, and they saw it as mostly Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak, the reason why I think the Tories suffered a bit is because Rishi Sunak was also a little bit implicated. Whereas they can move on from Partygate because that was just, and I think the public see that was individuals, not the whole party. But this economic life, if the new leaders do not themselves say, yeah, that was terrible. Do you know what actually, I'm going to refer to something else. I still can't get over the fact that both Talk TV and GB News invited Liz Truss on to talk about the budget yesterday. I cannot believe that. Who would do that? Who would get on Liz Truss to talk about the economy? However, Kwasi Kwarteng was also commenting on it. And do you know what he said? His own is It says being sacked was humiliating. Now Reeves is clean up our mess. Kwasi Kwarteng has actually written an opinion piece in the I newspaper, basically saying we can't actually blame Rachel Reeves for what she's doing. She's actually dealing with our mess, which is remarkable, really. Admiral Pegasus to say, I noticed Sunak's response was full of lies. Yeah, just for a change. Despite his was upset of non-dom and flight costs. Well, the non-dom thing won't affect him anymore because his wife wasn't. Remember, his wife did voluntarily stop claiming the non-dom allowances. I seem to remember, so that won't affect him personally. However, the increase in capital. See, the thing is, the air duty that will affect him, of course, but that's like peanuts, right? What will affect Sunak is the increase in capital gains tax. That will, because that's what most of his income is classed as. Because we saw it from his tax returns as prime minister, right? It's the reason why he was paying such a low rate of tax. It's because it's mostly going through his capital gains. So he is going to be paying a lot more tax while he remains in the UK. Chris C, £2 super chat, thank you. It says, do you think Reeves hit the super rich enough? It's always a tricky question to answer that, because yes, you'll always get people going, well, why don't we just apply this wealth tax? Why don't we just apply this wealth tax? It's because they'll move the wealth. I don't understand why people don't say, why aren't we reforming land tax? Because it keeps being pointed out. Money, if you try and tax wealth, people will just move the wealth. Like you and I can't, if we've got wealth, we can't move it, right? We're not rich enough. But if you're very rich, you can move your money to reduce the tax liability, and people do. So what we should be, before we start talking about taxing like the super wealth, like wealth, not income, you know, but actual wealth. Because there was a good, sorry, a little tangent here. There was a good point being made by some economics editor, I've forgotten where now, and they were making the point that the national insurance thing is not a very good way to raise revenue. It would have been better to put it on income tax, and I totally agree with that. It would have been better to have just increased income tax. Because you wouldn't have to increase it to the lower end, you could increase it to the upper end. However, we know Labour can't do that. They had to be very specific about not increasing income tax because that costs votes. This is the problem. It is better to increase income tax, but you will lose votes. Whereas national insurance is a different thing. A lot of people don't really think about national insurance because it's not actually that much. For most people, if you look at your national insurance contributions compared to income tax, nowhere near as much. So, you know, that's a much easier, particularly when it's employers as well. So that's even easier for most people to swallow. Yeah, in terms of, so I think we should do two things before we even think about talking about taxing wealth, actual wealth, not income. First of all, we have to make sure people can't just easily move the money, because that's what they'll do. They'll just move the money. So what we actually need to do is to make it harder to engage in tax avoidance schemes. And actually, they are doing that. Rachel Reeves is doing that. The other thing we should do before we look at that is land, because, you know, economists that seem to be quite sensible keep saying you can't move land. If you own land, you can't just shift that to the Cayman Islands. So why aren't we just looking at land tax reform? Why is everyone going, oh, just tax the wealthy? Because it's easy to say, isn't it? Like Sharon Graham was whining that, yeah, it was all right, the budget, but I wish she'd taken on my proposal to tax the wealthy. You didn't have a proposal. She didn't have a proposal. She just said, put this, whatever it was, 2%, 1% tax on wealth or above a certain amount or something. That's not a proposal. You haven't explained how you're going to stop them just moving it out of the country. And the thing about moving it out of the country is you end up drawing in less tax because they're already paying some tax on it. So if you've got a huge amount of wealth in the country, you're paying some tax because you're making some income off it. So you're paying some tax on it anyway. If they move it out of the country, you not only don't get the wealth tax because they've moved the bloody wealth, you also don't get the tax you were getting anyway because they've moved it. Anyway, sorry, there's another super chat. Ivan Ambrose keeps going. £4.99, thank you. It says, on the whole, a good budget. I'm concerned, however, with what was absent from it. Yes, I know. Nothing about mental health, disability, and social care. So, no, I quite agree. There actually was things about all of those things. What I would say is no details. Now, the biggest issue for me, the mental health, it was actually in there. It is in the budget. But the biggest omission for me, so we know they've talked about reducing the welfare bill. That is obviously causing concerns for some people. And we know why they have to do that, because of all public expenditure. Welfare expenditure is the one that most key voters resent. And that is because they're absolutely loving more spending on the NHS. Everyone uses the NHS. Most people are happy with more spending on schools because most people either have kids, or if they don't have kids, they understand that you need a well-trained workforce to power the economy. So they get the link between education and the economy. Policing, defense, you name it. If you increase public spending on it, people see the benefit. Benefits, ironically, is the one area where most people go, well, I will never need it. It doesn't do me any good. So they resent it. However, if you look, and I've been looking at how they're going to break it down. It's not clear how they're going to do it. They've said that they're going to be reforming a few things, and that we're not going to see what those reforms are until next year. Obviously, that is worrying people. It's that, because what I would say is, okay, they can't tell us the detail about what they're going to do because they haven't themselves decided. But if you're going to launch a review to reform anything, you still set parameters. I mean, Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves are not telling civil servants, we want to make these savings, come back with some ideas. You set parameters, right? There are red lines that you set for them to say, don't bother doing stuff like this. And what I would like to see is for them, they are alluding to it. There's little hints, like even in the budget, there's little hints about, yes, there are people who cannot work. And yes, there are people who have illnesses that can't be dealt with and stuff like that. So there are little lines in there that tell you, or no, not tell you, suggest, because the worry surely is that the Tories were planning on just making it harder to access certain benefits. So the worry is, of course, because Labour haven't ruled doing that out, that's what they might be planning. And that's my issue with it. Now, you can look at individual lines in the budget where it talks about it, and you can say, in fact, let me try and find some. It might take me a little while. Because where you look, if you look up the word welfare in the budget, almost every single reference is cracking down on benefit fraud. So you actually start to think, are they expecting to make these savings effectively as a result of tackling benefit fraud, which then doesn't obviously affect genuine claimants at all? Possibly. But again, they're not making that clear. So that is an issue. In terms of mental health, it is in there. And let me just have again a little look. Again, there's no details, but there aren't any details for any spending. Because what happened, again, all the budget is it's the government, it's just saying there's going to be so much money for this general area, but the specific way it gets spent is down to departments, and they haven't announced it yet because they can't announce it until the budget. So now when it comes to mental health, like it does say here, £26 million for new mental health crisis centres. We also know, because it was in the manifesto, that Labour have talked about creating community hubs specifically for young people to get mental health help, and also that there'll be contacts in every school for dealing with mental health for the young. So we know young people will be getting a lot better mental health investment. But in terms of like the wider population, there is the odd mention of it. So there's £26 million extra crisis centres. Is there anything else there? No, that's basically it. That's the mention in there. But again, there'll be more details presumably when where Streeting makes his announcement. Because what I would say as well is, like, in terms of the economics, mental health is a huge drag on the economy because it's not really being dealt with. Like with the NHS waiting list, physical illnesses and injuries are being dealt with too slowly, but they're being dealt with. Whereas mental health, really not at all. BFC Mike there saying benefit fraud actually pales into its significance to corporate tax evasion. Yes, absolutely, it does. And again, Reeves has announced moves to tackle that as well. So it is being done at both ends. But it is, yeah, it's absolutely the case. Every report into it says the amount of money that is basically fiddled on the part of very wealthy people is way more than in terms of what people understand by benefit fraud. There was a specific allusion to the idea of moving NHS services back into communities. Labour had already announced that, and that was in the manifesto indeed, that there was going to be more investment in local community care. My issue there is, did that mean coming at a cost to, there is an argument that what Labour could do is delay the time it will take to really get the waiting list down in order to front load that investment in community care. So there is a possibility there. Does the 18-week target count towards mental health too? I suspect not. But again, the budget does not provide the details on things like that. That is down to the department. That's not down to Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves just holds the purse strings. So exactly what the NHS do is down to Wes Streeting, and of course his other ministers. I hate the fact that pull yourself together attitude very much exists still. Yeah, and it's because mental health is largely invisible. I mean, there are people with actual physical issues where they're not particularly visible, and people again downplay them. And it is a problem, and it's a problem, especially it's a weird problem because everyone experiences mental health problems, but most people do not experience them. They're not chronic, and they're not particularly. It's like everyone gets a little bout of depression, and then you do usually just move past it. So that you really just pull. So yeah, exactly this pull yourself together attitude, and again, it's poor education. But it's probably because successive governments have looked at the cost of it and going, well, this is like creating a whole new NHS. Increasing the minimum wage above inflation will reduce universal credit. Universal credit to working people is effectively corporate welfare. Yes, it is. I mean, that's, yeah. Big companies being subsidised to the taxpayer to pay too little. The other thing, though, is because people will look at the fact that because inflation is now quite low, that has actually screwed over the increase in universal credit. But the OBR do say inflation will go up a bit next year before coming back down again as well. So we'll have to see what it is next year. But I mean, the big thing there is can we actually create more jobs where they're needed? But there it is. So they say my mental health illness is not going to get better. It's about managing it. The way I manage it is by not ending up on a psychiatric ward permanently working. I've worked, and I have worked makes me worse. I mean, again, mental health is real. I mean, I just know from personal experience, not me personally needing it, but people I've known. Where I am in the country, it actually just literally doesn't exist. Because everyone I've known who has had serious mental health problems has been unable to access medical care for it. Like all they can get is a GP going, well, I can give you some tablets. That's it. That's all they get. Nothing else. And you can't even get it. And then mental health, it's all in the mind. Yeah. Broken legs, all in the leg. It doesn't stop it being a serious issue. Remove Starmer's red lines and start the process would help the economy. But it wouldn't. This is my point. It wouldn't. Like Labour, if he came out and said, yeah, we should join the single market, right? Everything he's doing right now is the same stuff he would do if he said that. Like There is no slowing down on reversing Brexit because of Labour's red lines. The insistence on the no freedom of movement is an unfortunate one, but again, in terms of what they're actually doing, because the EU are not just sitting there, well, you could join the single market if you like. They're actually saying the opposite. They're saying you can't. They're not even sounding particularly happy about talking about the things that Labour are wanting to do. The veterinary agreement, that would be part of joining the single market. The mutual recognition of qualifications, that would be part of joining the single market. There are several things that Labour want to agree with the EU that would all be steps towards joining the single market. And the EU do not, I mean, there's a lot of complaining that Labour don't sound all that enthusiastic about the youth mobility scheme. Well, the EU don't sound enthusiastic about our steps to move closer to the single market either. So the idea that we could actually say, instead of these small steps, can we have the big step and join the single market? And the EU would go, oh yeah, we didn't like the small steps, but the big steps, sure. That's absolutely ridiculous. So yes, the being outside the single market is a massive drag on investment, and as you say, a massive drag on the economy. The OBR said it. The OBR said it in their analysis. It's a huge drag on the economy. It's a huge drag on growth. Not a thing Labour can do about it. Not a thing. Apart from try and move closer, step by step. And then, as Peter Mandelson says, then in about 10 years' time, never mind, because this focus on joining the single market's all wrong as well. That is not in our interest. It's like saying, oh, should we join the single market then, but not the EU? No, we should join the EU. Because if you join the single market, you are still following rules that are not being set in your national interest. We should be in the EU. We should be deciding on the rules that affect our market and our economic interests. Gary said, I still can't believe the Tories took us out of the EU. They were absolute idiots, morons. But I keep saying MPs are idiots. Most MPs, it doesn't matter, it's not just Tory MPs. Most MPs not very bright, and they don't understand politics. They amplified the threat of UKIP. And I mean, look what's happened. The Brexit Party, Reform UK, it's the same thing. Reform UK are now a bigger threat to the Tories than UKIP ever were. Like in 2015, what damage did UKIP do? UKIP got a higher share of the vote than Reform UK did this year in 2015. They took one seat. So UKIP's vote was even more spread out than Reform UK's. And and they were utterly mad, utter madness. But they did it. It's too late. It's done. It's done. So they say, if I'm forced into employment, my condition gets worse. There's nothing that Labour have said that suggests that. I agree that because they're not like, they've come out with lots of statements ahead of this budget to calm down various people, employers, investors, people like that. They haven't come out with any statements that have basically calmed people down who are in the welfare system. But they haven't said anything that suggests they're going to force people into work either. It's they've actually made it, the budget makes it clear. Keir Starmer's recently said, Liz Kendall said, yes, there are people who cannot work. So they have said that. Now, I'm not saying don't worry about it, because I still think there's plenty to worry about, because the political situation is, like I've said, the general public, they like spending. You name a government department, increase spending in it, they're a big fan of that. Not necessarily, well, it depends on how much it costs them personally, but there is no government department that they don't see an advantage to themselves in boosting spending for, except welfare. So the Department for Work and Pensions is the one area, and even then it's specifically the welfare part of it. That is the only public spending the public, like key voters, resent. And the fact, of course, that people who are part of the welfare system tend not to ever be what you would call key voters. So the politics is concerning. It would be much less concerning if they were either key voters or the general public did not have such an issue with it. But there we go. Chris C, £2. Most MPs don't live in the real world. Well, most people don't. I mean, Graham said about there, most people being fairly stupid. Most people don't. I mean, to be fair, it goes both ways. So yes, MPs, particularly if they've been MPs for a while, their income, you know, if they're a millionaire, they may not think their income is very much, but actually, you know, it's basically, it's way over double the national average, isn't it? It's nearly treble the national average. So it's a very comfortable living, and of course, it's guaranteed as long as they keep winning elections. Yeah, so it's so they're not going to really experience. They may have in the past. Some MPs may have in the past, but they're not going to experience the tribulations that a lot of ordinary people have. But it does work both ways, because then a lot of ordinary people also don't understand the reality at the other end either. So there are very few people in the country who probably actually understand most of the problems with the country. Viv there saying, I spoke to a friend who works in a job centre. She's not allowed to help people filling forms or support them in any way. Kind of spot I hope Labour is referring to. So yeah, I mean, this is all a hang up from the Tories. Remember, Labour have actually described the welfare system as punitive. Now, unfortunately, because I checked, they didn't actually put, I would have been happier had they put this down in writing, as in the manifesto. They haven't, which is because that would be a real marker. If they'd in the manifesto attacked the punitive nature of aspects of the DWP, then I'd be a lot more comfortable. But they have nonetheless said so. So, I mean, I'll tell you what I personally think, and I know I'm not affected by it, so it's easy for me to think whatever I like. I think it would be ridiculous to suggest that Labour will somehow be more punitive than the Tories. So I don't see how things would realistically get worse. I have looked at some of the breakdown in welfare spending, and actually after a few years, some of it goes up. So for all the talk of cuts, I am hoping that where they intend those cuts to come from is reducing benefit fraud. Because if they can get virtually all of it, if not actually all of it from there, then there's arguably not a problem. What I think the worst case scenario situation is that Labour don't make things worse, but they don't really make things better. And then, of course, you could argue, even if they do make things better, is it better enough? Because the Tories don't get to set the bar on a functioning welfare system, because we know after 14 years of Tory government, the welfare system will be as punitive as it can realistically get. I say that, the Tories were planning on making it more so maybe they hadn't. But there we go. Anyway, we've completely run over. Sorry, I've just seen the time. We've gone mental. We could go on forever. Sorry about that. I've got work to do. So we will have to leave it there. But I have put links to the 3 main documents in the description below, so check those out. But it's a lot of reading. But you can scan them. They're all PDF documents. You can search for terms. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe. Have a great rest of day. Until next time, I'll see you later.